Just make sure that the refresh. Oh, there it is. Mute that. Oh, there it is. Oh. Mute that. Oh, is that the YouTube one? Yeah, it is. Oh, I try and have my streams on the different platforms open so I can monitor if they try and take down my
sure
streams prematurely. That way I'm not like rambling on for hours on end.
Yeah.
Oh man. It's usually YouTube I have the most trouble with. They're such man, they take me off.
Yeah, it'd be nice if a serious competitor to YouTube came around one day.
I'm looking forward to that, actually.
Yeah.
Competition is good.
Yeah.
Welcome to WyzGyz Entertainment. This is your host, Wyman. We are joined today by a very, very special guest, ItchyBacca. Hello.
Hello.
How are you today?
Pretty good. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thanks. So, to anyone not already familiar, would you tell us a little bit about your origin story, if you will?
My origin story.
When I was born.
Yeah, I came from my mother. So I'm assuming you're talking probably about the origin of my blog and all that stuff.
Exactly.
So yeah, basically, I saw, I'm a longtime Star Wars fan, have been since the 1970s. I'm what is referred to as a first fan by some. So, I've been a fan for a very, very long time, through thick and thin, through the dark times, as some people call them. And then I went to go see The Force Awakens. Disney purchased the franchise, and I was cautiously optimistic. I thought, well, I've enjoyed the Marvel movies. They've done well with those. Certainly, it stands to reason they may do the same with that. And I was also of the opinion that while I enjoyed the prequels, and there's a lot of good stuff in them, I'm also able to acknowledge their faults, their problems. And I thought, well, if they take George Lucas's ideas and flesh them out, then they could really have something great, because that's essentially what they did with Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. They kind of took his ideas, and even really A New Hope, because he was still working for studios. He wasn't in complete control yet.
Mm-hmm.
So they had his ideas, and other people were helping him kind of form them. And I thought, well, if Disney does something like that, it could really turn out well. And then I saw The Force Awakens, and it was just a massive disappointment. It just felt like empty fluff.
Empty fluff.
It was just, it was hollow, it was shallow, it was meaningless. The art design was, I call it cannibalistic, because, as George said, there was nothing new in it. It was all 40-year-old Ralph McQuarrie leftovers, painted red. It's just really, really uninteresting. But it was unoffensive. So I just kind of shrugged my shoulders. It felt a lot like the Star Wars knockoff movies from the 1978 to 84 era. It didn't feel like Star Wars. It felt like one of those knockoff movies, where they take motocross gear and paint it red to create space armor, that kind of stuff. But it was unoffensive, so I just kind of shrugged my shoulders and whatever. It sucked, but it is what it is. And then The Last Jedi came around, and that was just a spit in the face on multiple different levels. Obviously, you had the same problems with the cannibalistic art design. It was just really boring visually. The narrative was incredibly boring. It was 2.5 hours long, and it felt like 2.5 days. It was just terrible. You had this incredibly moronic communist propaganda being mouthed off by the Rose Tico character. You had this ridiculous dynamic going on between Poe Dameron and Holdo. They were really trying very hard to show that a woman could bark orders at a man. And it was just so dumb. It was just so stupid.
I know. Yeah.
We've seen that previously before. Leia gave orders to men, and the men followed them, and that was it. But they belabored this point through this whole movie. It was just ridiculous. And it ended up coming off. I created kind of a brief comic or a meme that I posted on my blog once. The whole dynamic between Holdo and Poe came off like an overbearing mother scolding her kid who's jumping on a big wheel over a jump. Stop doing that. Stop doing that. That's essentially what she was doing to Poe. So all these kids who might go to this movie wanting to live vicariously through their hero are now getting scolded in the movie too. And so I found that really just ridiculous. Just every level of the movie was offensive.
It was, yeah.
And I've certainly not seen it again since. It will never stain my eyes ever again.
Not even for research purposes?
No, never. No, never, ever.
Oh, man.
And so after seeing that, I was like, am I the only one thinking this way? And then I started seeing YouTube channels talking about it. One of the first ones I saw was SC Reviews. And he was starting to read these articles that were written by these militant feminists talking about how fandom has a white male problem. And so they were calling all of us old-time fans racists and sexist for criticizing this really bad movie. Mm-hmm. And that was ridiculous. And so eventually I thought I needed to have my own say. I didn't want to spend that much time on it, really, so I didn't open up a YouTube channel at the time, even though I do video editing and motion graphics by trade.
Ooh, nice.
So I just opened up a very simple blog because I could type up a response to any particular article or issue in about 10 minutes. It doesn't really take very long. And put it out there. And then it started to gain, I started talking with SC Reviews, and he started showing my blog on his channel. And then it started to gain attention to more YouTubers. And then Ethan found it somehow. I don't know how. But, and then it just kind of went from there, gaining more popularity. And then now I've opened up a YouTube channel because I'm going to be transitioning from blogging to YouTubing.
Oh.
At some point, I'll walk away from the blog when I feel it's served its purpose. But so that's really kind of the origin story.
Wow. So did your are you actually going back through all your previous blog posts and kind of like recreating, like redoing the stories the topics you covered in the blog, except in YouTube video or stream format?
Yes and no. So I do go back through my blog and look at old posts, but I'm not just translating posts into video form, straight. What I'm doing currently, I have about 10 documentaries up that are Star Wars related up on my YouTube channel. And what I'm doing is focusing each documentary on a particular subject or particular aspect of what we experienced over the last 3 years. So, for instance, I have a documentary up about what happened to Ahmed Best and the whole media narrative surrounding him. Well, I did go back through my blog posts. I think there was about a half dozen blog posts that focused on that, and I took notes. I wrote a script based on those blog posts, and then I did additional research to kind of fill in holes. Because what I'm finding is things, when you go back and you reevaluate and you start analyzing the stuff that happened in the moment a year or two ago, and you put these things together, you start learning new things. For instance, I have another documentary up called Degrading Luke Skywalker.
Yeah.
And I went through all my blog posts regarding Luke Skywalker and his treatment, not only in the movies, but in the novels and the comic books and the video games and all the rest of it. And I put that all together in a single documentary. And it really demonstrates how Lucasfilm really has kind of a palpable disdain for the character, as one insider said. And it's really just evident how they're trying to fundamentally change the nature of the character and transform it to shape it into their political worldview. And you don't really get that when you do a blog post on, oh, look at the stupidity in this comic book in this one frame. You really only get a brief snapshot. When you put all of these things together, you start to get a much fuller picture. And so that's kind of what I'm focused on doing right now.
Absolutely. Excuse me. I was looking at some of the thumbnails, the little video previews of some of the videos on the degrading whatever the character is or what happened to. And it's got this little interface that looks like two little computer monitors side by side. How did you come up with that, or what brought up that idea? Gave you?
So I think you're talking about that. I think that was in the Degrading Luke Skywalker video, and that was essentially comparing the sequence, the famous sequence in Star Wars of Luke and Leia going across the chasm on the grappling hook line.
Oh, right.
And they redid it in the Galaxy of Adventures animated series.
Right.
And so when you watch them side by side, the animated series is a clear distortion. They're trying to elevate the Leia character by degrading the Luke character.
Right.
And it's very evident, in the original film, Luke and Leia work together as equals to get across the chasm. But in the animated Galaxy of Adventure series, she's slapping him in the face. He's tangling himself up in his cord. She grabs the gun and does all the firing. it's just a really ridiculous depiction of both characters, of Leia and Luke. And it really indicates a clear agenda at work.
That's for sure. I don't know if it's the right term, but it seems so disheartening to see them chip away at these beloved characters who are, you know, OG canon, and they're shoving in agenda every which way but upside down, or as well as upside down. But oh man,
yeah. Well, you know, that's what they do. It's part of what I called the Geekergate. You know, they do this in just about every hobby, or more accurately, they do it to anything that they designate as cultural. They'll target anything they see as cultural because they have an interest in dictating culture. That's why they get so angry when fans criticize, and you know, we got barked at by several Lucasfilm representatives saying that we're not customers because they don't really view it as a capitalist system. They don't view Lucasfilm as the capitalist company that it is.
right?
They see themselves as cultural stewards, and they want to disseminate culture, and they want us to accept it without a peep, whatever they dish out, you know. And it's not too surprising because when you look to other countries that are operated by these kinds of really fringe SJW leftist types, you know, the communist nations, they have ministries of culture where they do exactly that.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's part of that mental problem that they have, where they need, it's this kind of control freak mental problem where they have to dictate everything.
Yeah, it's like taking an existing culture, invading it, overriding it, rewriting history, and
It's essentially cultural subversion on a small scale. Small scale meaning our particular geek hobby. You know.
no. What do you think their end game is? What encourages them to even attempt to do this in the first place?
Well, I've written about that at some length on my blog. I have some blog posts entitled Cultural History Lessons where I get into that. And I'll end up producing documentaries on that at some point. It really all goes back to the Russian Revolution in 1917. It goes back to characters like Jorge Lukács, I hope I pronounced his name right, and Antonio Gramsci, who were two Marxists who developed something called cultural terrorism. That's what Jorge Lukács developed in the Frankfurt School in Germany. And when the Nazis came to power, he fled Germany and went to Columbia University. And that's where critical theory was born. And essentially what it is it says instead of marching in a violent revolution, which you may lose, you invade the cultural institutions and try to transform the culture from within. Antonio Gramsci, when he was in prison, wrote a long manifesto about this. He called it the Long March Through the Culture, but it's the same thing. And Yuri Bezmenov, who is now suddenly gaining popularity because of the Cold War video game trailer. What is the name of the video game? It's Call of Duty. Call Call of Duty Cold War.
Yeah.
Yuri Bezmenov was featured in the trailer for that game. But I've been writing about him on my blog for quite some time, and he spoke about all of this and what he called cultural subversion. And he talks about how it takes about a generation, because that's how long it takes to educate a generation of students. Right. So, and it's about changing the culture from within so that once they get to a certain point, it's like the martial art Aikido, where you're not punching somebody. It's more of a passive movement where somebody tries to punch at you. They're already moving, so you grab their arm and throw them over using their own movement. And that's the purpose behind all of this, to kind of push us culturally in that direction. So when we get to a certain point, it'll be easy to push us in the direction they want us to go. And they don't have to invade with, tanks and all that.
Yeah, it's almost like a martial arts style where you're more evading but using the momentum of your opponent against them.
Right, that's exactly it.
Club Star Wars says the folks running these things have been through the university complex and have been indoctrinated into postmodern or Marxist worldview.
Yeah, that's true. I spent time at university. I've earned 2 degrees, but I went to school much later in life. I basically returned as an unconventional student, a much older student, basically because I wanted those pieces of paper, the degrees.
Oh, yeah, sure.
I thought they would be good to have. I had already had decades of experience before returning to school in my field, but I felt I wanted those degrees. And it was quite an experience because I was surrounded by 18 to 22-year-olds, and I was already educated, self-educated largely because I'm a voracious reader. And watching what they were teaching at university was alarming, to say the least. It was clear to me that these were not educational institutions. These were political indoctrination institutions.
Oh, yeah.
And when I graduated, I fled the city and moved rural because I saw what they were teaching in class. And all this stuff that's happening right now with Antifa and the riots, I foresaw all of that happening. I knew it was going to happen. I knew it was going to happen specifically because of what they were teaching these really naive and highly impressionable 18-year-olds in class.
Oh, my gosh, yeah. My gosh. Kino Subway says, "Hello, everyone." Hey, Kino Subway, good to have you. Good to have you, Lord Vader. And Club Star Wars. Lord Vader asks, what do they teach?
Well, everything is based on critical theory. It's all Marxism. Everything is all based on Marxism. So I went to school, basically film school. And in that particular aspect, every analysis, any class that deals with film analysis, analyzes it from a Marxist and Freudian point of view. And that's the only point of view. They don't view it through any other lens. They don't view it through, say, like Voltaire or some other philosophy, some other philosopher. Everything is all Marx. And the other side of that is activism. They teach these kids to go out and do activism. In many cases, many of these protests that you'll see on TV, these are college kids gaining course credit for engaging in these antics. For instance, there was one graphic design class I was in, and one of the things they taught was what they called as culture jamming. And what this is teaching the student to go out to billboards and spray their own political message on the billboard. And the idea is that you're jamming the capitalist culture with your own message. So they call it culture jamming. To normal people, it's just vandalism.
It is, yeah.
Right.
I can say.
But that's what they're teaching these kids in class.
Oh, man. Insane.
There's very, very little, if any, genuinely educational or worthwhile material being taught at university today. At least from what I've seen just recently.
Mm-hmm.
And it is very alarming. If parents took the time to review their kids' material or go to school and sit in a class, I think they would be shocked. And, you know, there's a reason that there was recently, I think it was a school in Tennessee that specifically asked the parents of their students to not review the online courses of their students.
What the frick?
Why do you think that would be?
Oh my gosh, that's crazy.
Yeah.
That is nuts beyond belief. Club Star Wars says they basically teach CRT, critical race theory.
Yeah, critical theory, and then it's uglier, younger sister, critical race theory. So the SJWs within Lucasfilm are using Star Wars as a kind of carrier wave for their own political messaging. It's not about appealing to the customer. It's about trying to transform normal people into SJWs like themselves. That's really the goal here. And so I'm using Star Wars in the exact same way. I'm using Star Wars as a carrier wave for the politics of normalcy. In an effort to fight back against that, and how successful or not I am is up for others to debate. But that's, you know, my modus operandi, I guess.
Yeah, it's oh man. Lord Vader asks, have you ever encountered a professor who admitted they're a Marxist?
While I attended university routinely. I mean, it's not an unusual encounter. They're open about it when they think that.
Man.
When they're open about it when they think that everyone around them is receptive to what they have to say. They'll refute it if they think there's critics in the room. But if everybody's on their side, then they're really quite open about it, and it's just not unusual at all.
Did you have a tendency to share your thoughts and feelings with your fellow classmates as well as with the instructors, or did you kind of fly below the radar and just observe and soak it in and really get, really try and figure out what his angle was?
Well, a little bit of both. As I said, I was a much older student, so I really didn't have much common ground with the 18-year-olds I was in class with. There wasn't really much for me to discuss with them beyond the necessities of, working on a project if we had to, or something along those lines. So in that regard, I usually stuck to myself. But where I did, quote unquote, fight back, was in the coursework. And I would, if I was required to write a paper, I would write my mind. Being a much older student and understanding what my rights were and how I could go about fighting problems with faculty if they decided to give me a poor grade because they didn't like what I was saying.
That was another question, yeah.
I don't think that they were willing to pester me about it because they wouldn't have been able to. they need. I'm not this naive 18-year-old.
Mhm.
But with the naive 18-year-old, they take a completely different course. They will definitely come after them because they know that the 18-year-old can be intimidated.
Mm-hmm.
Know.
True.
And the 18-year-old will look at the professor as an authority figure and will respect them even if they don't like them. I, on the other hand, have zero respect for authority. In fact, I have mostly nothing but disrespect for authority in most cases. So, that was never a problem for me too much.
Lord Vader says, I didn't know they teach Marxism in universities.
That's almost all they teach.
Oh,
I mean, even in the math class, you cannot escape a math problem in your textbook without Che Guevara being mentioned.
Oh, shit. Oh, crap. Really? Damn.
Really?
I thought you were going to go down the Common Core.
I would suggest for those who want greater insight on that to go to a website called campusreform.org. They're also on Twitter. Just start reading some of the stories they produce. In some cases, there will be video taken by students in class that show all this stuff. It's really not a secret anymore.
Did you say it's campusreform.com?
Campusreform.org.
Org, okay.
Yeah.
I figure check that out a little bit later. Man. Kev Pod says, Hail, ItchyBacca.
Hail.
TV. Club Star Wars addressing Lord Vader. BLM founders admit they're Marxist. Yeah, I've seen this. So what if I'm conservative and I ask them?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Lord Vader is asking, so what if I'm a conservative and I ask them?
If you ask them what?
I think that's in reference to asking if they're Marxist or if they admit to being Marxist.
Well, like I say, it really depends on the situation. If they're in class with a bunch of students they're very familiar with, that are all a bunch of these Antifa, or, 10 years ago, it was Occupy. Before that, it was SDS, the Students, Democratic Socialists, or something along those lines. If they're all one big happy collective and they're all familiar with each other, they're very open about it. But they're guarded about it if there are critics in the room. So if you come off as a staunch conservative critic, chances are they'll balk at it, they'll roll their eyes and talk about, oh, it's just a big commie conspiracy. But the moment you leave the room and they're in there with the rest of their socialist comrades, they'll talk about it openly. So I would suggest not asking them as a staunch conservative critic. I would suggest playing yourself off as a socialist and ask them under that guise and see what they say. Because you'll find a much different answer coming out of them.
Yeah. Yeah. I can believe it. Kev Pod says, I was totally unpopular at college as I was so outspoken. Everyone was a Marxist, teachers and students.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not surprising.
Club Star Wars says, they're even arguing that 2 + 2 = 5 now. Have you come across that yet?
Yeah, I've seen that. I've heard of that. It just recently started making the waves on Twitter. I've read about that on campusreform.org before, though. That's been going around for a while. But it probably all goes all the way back to the new math of the 1980s, really.
Common Core?
Yeah.
Common
Core and then new math before that.
That pisses me off. Math is one of my favorite subjects, and when they started introducing that crap,
Yeah.
you look at how long it takes to come up with an answer, and you've got kids who are coming out of high school and college, working at like fast food joints, and they can't do math in their head.
Right.
And now they're expected to do Common Core math in their head. Oh, geez. That's not when it happened.
It's interesting because going back to Yuri Bezmenov, who was showcased in that Call of Duty video game trailer, you find his interviews on YouTube, and he talks about that.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the things you do during cultural subversion. In that, one of the spaces you apply that cultural subversion is in the academic space.
Mm-hmm.
And he talks about how you teach kids about their sexuality and basket weaving and drumming and all this worthless stuff.
Mm-hmm.
He says it doesn't matter what it is, as long as it takes them away from anything that's practical and useful.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
And so that's what's happening. We're churning out these graduates who are essentially the very fascists that they call everyone else. The modern university really is a fascism factory.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think parents and certainly employers are really not fully aware of this fact. Employers are still under the delusion that many of these degrees have value, when in fact they really, really don't. And so they continue to hire these people, and the process of entryism starts to begin in these companies. They start hiring them in their marketing departments and their human resources departments. And then you see these companies issuing these political statements on Twitter and all this stuff. And that's coming from these graduates who are highly indoctrinated in university.
Mm-hmm.
With all of this trash, with all of this garbage knowledge that Yuri Bezmenov talked about.
Yeah, I've seen some.
And it's evident.
Yeah.
It's not some conspiracy of, people hiding in a darkened, smoke-filled conference room with, secret documents and all that. It's all right out in the open for anyone who's paying attention.
Yeah. It can be some scary stuff. I've seen some of his videos, and it's like eye-opening.
Yeah, it really is.
You see it being played out, literally.
Yeah.
And you've got schools, grade schools, promoting children to explore their sexuality.
Oh, yeah.
And they start getting real graphic as well.
Yeah.
And I saw some articles recently saying, schools are concerned about, the pandemic continuing because it means there's more online schooling.
Mm-hmm.
And with online schooling, parents have a greater chance of discovering, what it is their kids are really learning in class.
Right.
And normalizing sexuality, they're promoting transgendered people for story times and all that.
That was part of going back to Jorge Lukács, if I pronounce his name right. I can never remember how to pronounce his name, but he started off, I believe it was in Turkey, is where he first started to experiment with his cultural terrorism before he went to Germany. And the parents there found out what he was doing and drove him out of town. And part of what he was doing was indoctrinating them with this sexuality stuff, with being promiscuous with their sexuality. At the same time, also trying to separate them from their parents ideologically, so that the culture would not be able to be transmitted from generation to generation. And they ended up in Turkey, they ended up driving him out of town when they found out what he was doing. But part of the reason was not because they were advocates of homosexuality or trans or any of that stuff. It wasn't about supporting those things. That's not why he was using that. It was about creating confusion in the mind of a very young person. You know, I myself am libertarian. I don't really care what people do in the bedroom, but I don't care what mature adults do in the bedroom. You know, when you're a child, you have a much different mind.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you develop that way naturally as an adult, you know, I really don't, I just don't care. But when you're putting this stuff on a child who's just not ready for it, in the same way that they're not ready for a lot of things. For instance, like graphic violence in movies or whatever it may be. It causes confusion in their mind, and that in turn makes them much easier to subjugate and guide, because if they're confused, then you can offer the guidance.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really was the whole idea, was maybe not the whole idea, but was a big part of the cultural subversion devised by Jorge Lukács, which ended up migrating to the, Columbia University in the Frankfurt School, and turned into critical theory, which is the basis for the curricula in just about every university in America now.
Man. Yeah, it's like when I was growing up, we still had classes like Comic and actually, I guess it was my generation where they started phasing out things like learning how to balance a checkbook and things like that.
Yeah.
And they were getting rid of things that actually taught you about life and prepared you for the world.
Right.
And they're literally just throwing in fluff.
Yeah.
Everywhere you go, like you said, to occupy your time, to take your mind off of the important stuff, take your mind off the core basics like math, English, history especially.
Yeah.
And then they're rewriting the history books too.
Yeah.
To favor certain races or agendas.
Sure. Well, yeah, I mean, if you don't read and study history on your own, then you're much more likely to accept whatever the teacher or professor doles out. You're easily subjugated. You're easily indoctrinated.
Absolutely. Kev Pot says, a work friend at college to learn Italian. A work friend is at college to learn Italian, and she had to do a speech on the wage gap.
Yeah.
What the?
Not surprising.
Lord Vader says, so my sister, she goes to a university, and she told me racism is when one race has power over another race, and she told me minorities can't be racist. Is this because she went to a university?
Yes, that is exactly what they teach at university.
Oh,
it's in the textbooks.
Oh, man. Minorities can't be racist?
Yeah.
Oh.
And the reason why they say that is not because they support minorities. The reason they say that is because they think minorities subscribe to their political ideology. If they thought that minorities were all right-wing Republicans, they wouldn't say that at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
ItchyBacca, I'm a centrist. They won't even admit since I'm a centrist.
Well, a lot of them view the world as though they themselves are centrists, and they think anything right of Marx is an extremist.
Sure.
But this there's a lot of history to this and why this all happened. I talked about Jorge Lukács, He started doing it through Columbia University here in the United States around the 1930s. And, we have Yuri Bezmenov talk about how it takes about a generation to train students to fully indoctrinate them, because that's how long it takes to educate a generation. Well, Jorge Lukács was doing this in the United States in the 1930s. And what happens 20, 30 years later? About a generation. We get the hippies, who were kind of the prototype to the modern day SJW. These are people who are running around, free love, LSD, taking all kinds of mind-altering drugs. And so they were very easy to indoctrinate. And unfortunately, many of them, as they grew older, went into academia and are now teaching these young kids as elderly hippies, as professors themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
Welcome, Fate Salvation. Hail, everyone. Lord Vader says, my stepdad told me it's more useful to go to trade school than college.
I agree. I went to both. I first went to a trade school to earn an associate's, and then I went to the 4-year university to earn a Bachelor of Fine Arts. And I found that the trade school was much more useful. There was still some of that in there. It certainly was not devoid of it. But because you're constricted to 2 years, they really have to focus on making you employable. That's the whole point of a trade school. So they don't have time for a lot of the nonsensical fluff. Where you find it primarily in the trade school is in the gen eds that you're required to take, the 5 or 6 classes or whatever it is for your local trade school.
Oh, yeah.
You'll find it mostly in there, particularly in the sociology classes where it's most prevalent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was just about to ask what your thoughts were on general ed courses, like even when you go from an associate's to a bachelor's.
Yeah.
And, having to take all those GE requirements
Yeah.
to earn the units to be eligible to go to the next stage of higher education.
Yeah.
And so many people complain and have complained over the years that, what's the point in taking these courses when they're not really teaching you anything that's going to help you later on in life?
Yeah, there's really not much point in taking them for your own value. The point is really all on the side of the quote unquote educator. It's their mission to fill your head with this gobbledygook. Mm-hmm. Some of them know exactly what they're doing and mm-hmm. want to indoctrinate you with socialist and communist trash.
Yep.
Some of them aren't aware of what they're doing because they themselves were indoctrinated by the hippie elderly professors and are now adjuncts and younger professors themselves. And they think they're doing something good in the world. So they've been programmed to perform these functions, but they don't really have a higher understanding of what they're actually doing. Either way, there's little to no value in what they're pushing. And honestly, think about it. I was in a class, I had to learn about Asian culture. I had one class on Asian culture because I love Asian culture. Absolutely love it. Art and architecture, absolutely love the stuff. So I took this class, and over the course of 5 or 6 months, however long the semester was, I had to listen to this idiot professor recite the contents of a book, chapter by chapter, week by week, which I could have purchased myself on Amazon for about $25 and read in a week. And instead, I had to sit through this 6-month-long course that cost, several $1,000s. what is the point of that? And the book ended up being like everything else at university, a bunch of Marxist claptrap. But I could have bought the thing for $25 and read it myself in a week. Why am I listening to this idiot professor for 6 months and paying him or the university $3,000?
Yeah, those kinds of courses are so painful. It's like the instructors you get where they do all their teaching from PowerPoint slides.
Yeah.
Oh man.
And the students just sit there and peruse Facebook and Twitter during the PowerPoint slide anyways.
Yeah.
They're probably better off doing that.
They probably learn a lot more, right?
Yeah.
Lord Vader says, I'm fiscally conservative and socially liberal on most issues.
That's really where I land too, to be quite honest. Honestly, I'm probably a classical liberal. The socialists around the turn of the century used the word progressive to describe their agenda. And then when FDR came into office, he appropriated the word liberal to replace progressive because progressive policies had fallen into disfavor. And in fact, he debated one of his presidential adversaries at the time during an election about who was the real liberal because he was appropriating that word for his progressive policies. But I am probably a liberal as what the word meant before FDR.
Right.
I want government out of my wallet, but I also want it out of my bedroom. So when I saw Democrats turning communist, that's when I kind of started to side with libertarians mostly.
Yeah.
Because I definitely am not interested in communism or socialism.
No, yeah. Doesn't sound like any fun.
Well, it's certainly not liberal. That's for sure. That's for certain.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah. Club Star Wars is asking, where do you see this going if Trump wins or Biden wins? Bullets have started flying in the streets. Is this the beginning of their so-called revolution?
Well, revolution and a civil war are essentially one and the same. It's a revolution if the Antifa savages win. It's a civil war if the normal people win. So, how it will go is anyone's guess. In my opinion, at this point, it's clear that we have two choices because reasoning with these Antifa savages is not an option. They're hysterical. They're lunatics. They're running through streets, burning buildings, attacking people, burning homes and businesses, confronting people, eating at restaurants. They're nuts. Mm-hmm. So we really have two choices. We can either fight and win a civil war, or we can allow ourselves to be governed by Antifa. Mm-hmm. Those are the two roads we have right now. And so we need to choose.
Yep. So to the far left, I'm an extremist only because I'm in the middle.
I'm sorry, could you say that again?
So to the far left, Lord Vader says, I'm an extremist only because I'm in the middle.
Right. They'll if you say anything that's even remotely moderate or centrist to them, they'll scream at you and call you a fascist.
Mm-hmm.
Because they have no understanding of what a fascist actually is. If they did, they would understand that they themselves are engaging in fascist activity.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It's just a fact.
Kevpod is saying, Itchy, if student loans and scholarships were scrapped, would cultural Marxism die in a quick death?
That's a good question. Obviously, it's certainly funded by a lot of that. Would it die a quick death? I don't know that that's a possibility anymore. I think it would have at one point, perhaps if we had done that in the 1960s, because there were far fewer of these extremist lunatics running around. But the problem is now you've got armies of these people who have been indoctrinated this way. So even if you cut it off at the schools, they'll hang out at their local coffee klatches and, disseminate their ideology that way.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean that it's not worth trying, but at this point, I'm probably skeptical that it would have much of an effect at this point. It may be too late.
Lord Vader says Biden is a center right when you really look at his politics.
Well,
right. What? Is that right?
Maybe. My personal view on Biden is that Biden is for Biden. I think he's self-absorbed, self-interested, and that's really it.
Kev Pott says university for science only. Everything else go to a library.
Well, yeah, go to a library, go to a bookstore, order books online. Follow your own interests. Instead of having some idiot professor assign to you what he's interested in or she's interested in, follow your own interests. You read a book, they talk about some other topic that's related, then you go find a book about that topic. You've read that book and it talks about this historical figure that seems a bit interesting to you. Go find a book on that historical figure. Follow your own interests instead of being led by the nose by these idiot professors who, frankly, without tenure, probably wouldn't be able to have a stable life of their own. I mean, they're complete and total morons. That was one of the things about returning to university that absolutely shocked me, was just how uneducated the professors themselves were.
Yeah, it's
consistently.
It's like they do. There's a trend, I guess, where they get comfortable because they have a tenure, and they essentially stop learning. They get stuck in their little world and just do the bare minimum.
Yeah, there's a misunderstanding that a person is capable of learning all there is to know, and it's completely false. No one on planet Earth knows everything. Anyone who comes off as a know-it-all, those are usually the dumbest people in the room.
Mm-hmm.
Because an intelligent person understands that it's impossible to know everything. No one on planet Earth does. There's always something new to learn. So, learning is a lifelong process.
Yep. Lord Vader asks, Itchy, do you think there's a huge chance that Biden might win, or who do you think will most likely win?
At this point, it's looking like Trump is going to win. Simply because that's the way a lot of the polls look. And the Democrats are waking up to the fact that all these riots are not a good look for them. 3 months after the fact, they're finally starting to realize this. It's kind of amusing. But
It is.
So yeah, right now it looks like Trump. How the actual election will play out is anyone's guess. During the Civil War, the Democratic Party used the KKK as its terrorist arm of the party, and it would intimidate blacks and white supporters of, abolition. In fact, when they would go to the polls to vote. In fact, a lot of whites were lynched for supporting abolition of slavery by the KKK. And the Democrats use them for that purpose, to intimidate people into voting their way. So they're using BLM and Antifa for the same purposes. They're using it as a terrorist arm of their party to intimidate people into voting their way. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens at the physical polls. I would be surprised if there weren't mobs of Antifa savages at the polls, intimidating voters in line. I'll be surprised if that doesn't happen.
I think to a certain extent, the last 12 years, the DNC was also using the Black Panthers for that purpose as well.
Sure.
Let's see here. Lord Vader states, these people are fascists because they're intimidating people and harassing people who don't agree with them.
Yeah, they are. And they're unaware of it because they're all uneducated, because they've spent their time in university having their heads filled with gobbledygook.
Mm-hmm. Club Star Wars says defund the humanities and social sciences.
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, I would like to see public education abolished altogether, to be perfectly honest. There are some instances where an extended in education is necessary. For instance, if you're a physician, you have to spend time learning what you're doing. But honestly, all through grade school, all through high school, it's all book knowledge. It's all reading books.
Yeah, it's like...
what the hell do you have to go to a building for to do that? You could do that sitting at home in your chair.
Yeah,
you could do that riding in a car. What do you need to sit in a building for?
Yeah, memorization and repetition and repeating. That's a good point. Do you think maybe private schools should also be abolished?
No. Just public education. I think just as they talk about separation of church and state, frankly, I think there could be, in addition to the Constitution, the kind of articles of separation of church and state would be one. I'd like to see a separation of education and state as well. And frankly, a separation of sciences and state as well.
Let's see. Biden doesn't care about the social justice these people are obsessed with.
No, he doesn't. He's only interested in himself.
Yeah, Obama's the same as Biden. Hey, Matanui, welcome. Late again, it seems. It's all good. It's sometimes hard to predict when I'm going to stream, but I always try and, when I'm going to have a guest, I try and schedule it out. And but I kind of threw this together at the last minute.
Sure, that's all right.
Lord Vader says, to be honest, I think Biden and Trump are the same. Do you agree, Itchy?
Biden and Trump are the same.
I think they're opposites, but what say you?
On some levels, there may be similarities. On others, I think there are fundamental differences. Again, I think Biden's only interest is himself. He doesn't really have any interest outside of that. Whereas Trump, look, he offered to send the feds to Portland to fix their problem multiple times, despite the fact that the mayor of Portland refused. Trump could have said, well, screw you then. but he didn't. He keeps offering. Recently the Antifa savages surrounded the condo of the mayor of Portland. So it'll be interesting to see if he finally buckles and accepts the feds. But, if Trump were self-interested in the same way Biden was, then he wouldn't offer that multiple times. There would be no point to it. He would say, fine, you guys, you guys just go ahead and burn from your own mistakes.
Right.
But clearly there's an interest in the other people in Portland other than just Trump and his beef with the mayor. So I do think there are differences.
Lord Vader says, do you personally think the Democrats have brainwashed a majority of the black community?
That's hard to say. I don't know. I think I don't think the black community is specific or different in any other way. I think they go for everyone they can get. Certainly there are many in the black community who don't subscribe to the Democrats. And what is the majority and what is the minority, I really have no way of knowing. But that's my take on that.
I have a tendency to believe the Democrats push a narrative to encourage blacks, especially in the projects, to have a victim mentality. And they make it seem as though the Democrats are the solution. But they never seem to enact policies that help the projects. Rather the
No. Well, if poverty were solved, then why would anyone need a Democrat?
Yeah.
It's part of the old divide and conquer strategy, really. It started with the hyphenated American.
Oh, yeah. Oh, geez.
By designating different groups and separating them. They don't just go after the black community. They go after everyone.
Right.
They go after anyone they can, but they use these artificial divisions of race and gender and sexuality to pit Americans against one another.
Yep. Cause jealousy and crap like that.
Yeah. And it's infuriating because these divisions are meaningless. Arguing over skin color. I mean, it's so childish. You might as well argue over the color of your car.
Yeah.
It's such a waste of time. You think of all the things people could be putting their effort and money into, curing cancer or colonizing Mars or extending the human life expectancy or, all these other things they could be spending their time and energy and money on. And instead they're arguing about melanin content. It's absolutely infuriating.
Yeah. It's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's, man. Okay. I just think both of them are very narcissistic.
Yeah, to some degree. Yeah. I would say Trump probably has a bit of narcissism. I think you have to have a little bit of that if you're going to pursue leadership positions.
Yeah.
Very few leaders don't have that. I think George Washington was one of the few who didn't.
Yeah. That's a good point.
They wanted to make George Washington king. He refused. They wanted to give him some long, elaborate title, your honor, your honorable ship, and all this stuff. And he's like, no, Mr. President, that's it. So, and he could have gone on and been president for many, many terms, but he said,
Oh,
nope,
yeah.
2 terms, that's it.
Yeah, and if I remember, he was even reluctant to even take the role of presidency.
Yeah, he didn't want it.
And that was not something he was thrilled with. But
no, he wanted to, work in his private life. He wasn't interested in any of that stuff. Those kind of men are very few and far between.
Yeah.
And that's why, generally, in my opinion, and why I have such a total disrespect for authority, is that most of the people who pursue positions of authority are not the type of people who should ever have any kind of authority at all.
Yeah, that's true. Do you think there's still like a segment of the population who go into careers in, say, politics with the best of intentions, with the heart for, wanting to make the world a quote unquote better place, to, serve the constituents that they're elected to represent? And then the longer they're in the political world, the more they get kind of knocked down a few pegs, and they become part of the corrupt system in politics.
Sure. I think, all human beings are fallible and flawed and have weaknesses. And adults are subject to peer pressure just as much as young people are. Adults are subject to bullying just as much as young people are. So, yeah, absolutely.
Excuse me. Biden's biggest selling point is that he is a harmless. If he wins, he will be as weak as Carter.
Well,
I don't know.
A lot of people feel that the man can, at this point, and I'm being kind, he can barely put a sentence together because of his age. And he may be going into Alzheimer's territory or something similar to that. It's one of the reasons Nancy Pelosi doesn't want him to go into the debates. I mean, if they debate, it's going to be
it's going to be slaughter.
He's going to be barely coherent.
Yeah.
And many of the people feel that the Democrats, that's why they want him in there, because at some point then early on, he'll say that he's unfit for office, and then Kamala Harris will step in, and she is a wacko.
Yeah. Huge wacko.
Yeah.
Man, she's another one of those flip-floppers. That changes her opinion based on what's the going trend.
Yeah.
Didn't see that right away, but I got it. Okay. Don't remember what the reference is for that. FDR, he took 4 terms.
Yeah, he did. Yeah. Yep.
Club Star Wars says, I hate that people are still arguing over skin pigmentation. I thought we were past that. It does seem that it's the left that are obsessed with it, and that it's them making it worse, not better.
Yeah. Well, again, they use it as a way to pit people against one another. Because when you keep the people fighting amongst themselves, then they don't fight you. And it's easier to keep your authority over them.
Absolutely true. Lord Vader says, a lot of lefties say that they want corruption to be over, but Kamala, she represents the corruption. Do they not realize the irony?
The people on the lower part of the collective hive don't. They're true believers. The people in the higher part of the collective hive do, but they don't care. They're going to do and say anything they have to gain power and authority, because that's all they care about. They don't care about anything else.
There was I think I've seen in like Twitter clips and screenshots and memes and stuff, saying that at one point, Nancy Pelosi was like adamant that Trump would not be reelected, and there was some comment that came out about her being politically next in line from the president. Do you think at some point she would try and exercise a move to try and run for presidency herself?
Sure. I mean, they're always seeking more and more power and authority. So if that avenue opened up for her, if she could find a path to that, she would certainly take it. I don't see any way that she wouldn't.
Now, did you happen to predict that out of everyone they had to choose from, they would go with Kamala Harris as the VP candidate?
To be honest, I wasn't following it closely enough to be able to predict who they would pick. This particular election, I'm not sure that it matters much outside of the potential that I was talking about of Kamala Harris, stepping in early on to replace Biden due to his inability to act as commander in chief. Outside of that possibility that some Democrats are hoping for, I sometimes think that the entire 2020 election is a throwaway election for them. I suspect that they're hoping to groom and gear up AOC as the 2024 candidate and run a kind of hope and change 2.0 campaign.
That would be scary. But I see your...
Yes, it will be.
I see where you're going there. That does make some sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
I kind of thought that, well, number one, I thought it was ridiculous that at the DNC they decided to go with Biden of all people, considering the condition he's in.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons that made me wonder if this was a throwaway election, because then in 2024 they push AOC. She doesn't have to run against an incumbent.
Yeah. And but it was like, out of all the candidates they had, as much as I didn't totally agree with all her stances, but I think her name is Tulsi Gabbard, seemed like the most competent out of the entire group there.
I haven't watched the debates. I haven't had time. I've been focusing on producing these documentaries.
Oh my gosh, yeah, absolutely. Speaking of which, well, before I ask that, let me ask this. Do you mind sharing what you mentioned? You have like 2 or possibly even more degrees in education. What fields were they in?
Sure. So I have an associate's degree in motion graphics, and I have a bachelor's of fine arts in film and video production.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Now, is motion graphics like slow motion? What is it called? Like claymation, or what is it? Still, I think I'm butchering the verbiage. I wanted to say still motion animation, but are you basically studying all range of film art, or is it like a particular focus on type?
So motion graphics is essentially a fancy term for animation.
All right.
Basically, what happened is at some point, everybody's familiar with the kind of animation that they have in commercials on television, on football games, when you see the score, on documentaries, that kind of stuff. And the professional field needed a way to differentiate that from cartoons, from kiddie cartoons.
Mm.
Because when people hear the word animation, or I should say people who aren't in the industry hear the word animation, they immediately default to thinking about Scooby-Doo.
Yeah, true.
So they needed a new term. They came up with motion graphics, and so that's that. And so I studied 3D modeling, motion graphics, all that kind of stuff, and I do all of that.
And I think this falls in that category, but I think one of the most useful advances I've seen in what I think is called motion graphics is, when you're watching a football game and they have like a superimposed image of the 50-yard line and all the markers, so you can see how close they are to the 10-yard line and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And you've got the logos on the grass, so you don't have to paint it on there.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think that's trippy and also very useful and practical.
Yeah. Yeah, there are new ways of visualizing information is constantly being invented, and it goes back to education being a lifelong process, because there's always new things around the corner, always.
Then we've got, let's see here. Madanui says that kind of shit's going to exist whether people want to be or not. As long as there are differences between us, some people will hate each other for that. Yeah, the whole talk about race.
To some degree, but it's really being exacerbated by these political activists in academia who are now producing students that are invading corporate America. That's really a serious problem. I mean, there's always going to be people who don't like other people. But indoctrinating these kids from kindergarten on to have seething, frothing hatred for other people to the point where they're willing to surround them while they're having a coffee at a coffee shop and start barking at them to raise their fist, that's an entirely different level.
Yeah, there's a huge rise in videos that are shared like on Twitter or Instagram, where you see even young children of different races casually walking up and then like punching the other person into submission for no apparent reason.
Yeah.
It's like, what the freaking hell? And then you've got some young punks pounding on elderly people, minding their own business.
Yeah.
It's like, it ticks me off to no end.
It's remarkably similar to what happened to the Cultural Revolution in China during the 1960s. If you read about the Red Guard, or there's a number of documentaries on YouTube about the Red Guard in China during the 1960s. And what they were doing is remarkably similar to what Antifa is doing now.
Mm. Let's see. And Lord Vader asks, have you guys noticed there were a lot of Bernie bros who hate Biden?
Yeah, Bernie bros hate anybody who isn't Biden or who isn't Bernie.
Yeah.
For some people, if you're not extreme far left, then you're not far left enough. That's all there is to it.
Yeah, Bernie is definitely socialist through and through.
Yeah.
The funny thing about it is he's always talking about everybody being willing to share the wealth and, distribute it among the needy. And then you look at his lifestyle. He drives it. He has expensive cars. He's got a mansion.
He's got like 3 houses.
Yeah. Oh man.
Yeah, why doesn't he share some of those?
Yeah, exactly. Imagine how many homeless people he could house.
Yeah. I mean, the leftists like to use the term grifter and apply it to anyone they don't like, but boy, that term applies to Bernie probably more than anyone else in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and his followers lap it all up.
Yeah. Lord Vader asks, Itchy, do you think some Democrats secretly want Biden to lose because of the reasons you just stated?
Yeah, I suspect so. Yeah.
Bernie had a better chance of beating Trump. Maybe a little bit, but Bernie's already tried uh, for the presidency. Actually, I think the DNC kind of screwed him over because their agenda was to push Hillary to the top.
I'm not sure that Bernie had a better chance than Biden, because Biden will appeal to more people, I think, than Bernie did. Bernie appeals to a very small subset of the population. Some of those people will begrudgingly vote for Biden. But Bernie or Biden appeals to a much more wider cross section of the population, I think, than Bernie does. Bernie has a very loyal fan base, but it's also very tiny.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's true. Okay. Yeah. Um, I think they're going to handle this much like the Biden and Clinton fiasco, where they try and convince his followers to vote for Biden as they tried to do to get them to vote for Hillary. Because Biden has, Bernie, one of the things they really like about him is he seems to energize the younger voters.
Yeah.
And
Sure.
the older, longer-term politicians have had trouble bringing in.
Well, it's a very easy thing to do. All you have to do is say all the things that young people want to hear. And very young people, not to disparage them, but the fact of the matter is, if you haven't lived a very long time, you're much more naive and you're more prone to believing promises that people make to you. When you live much longer and you hear these promises over and over and over again, and they never manifest or come true, with all that experience under your belt, you're much more skeptical. But when you're 18, you don't have all those decades of experience to view those promises through. So it's easy. All you got to do is say anything young people want to hear, and the vast majority of them will come running.
Yeah. It's like increase the minimum wage at fast food joints.
Yeah. It's the young person doesn't understand the cascading effect that something like that would have. The fight for 15 sounds wonderful. I mean, what kid at 16 wouldn't want to be making $15 an hour? Of course.
Right.
It's a no-brainer. But then that means McDonald's would have to raise the cost of their burgers to support that wage, which would then in turn mean that your Big Mac would cost $20 to $30, which would then mean fewer people would come in to buy the $20 to $30 Big Mac, which would then mean business would go down, which then in turn would mean they would have less money to pay you. And since they can't pay you less than 15, they would simply lay you off.
Yeah.
One of the unintended consequences of that whole fight for 15 is Flippy the robot.
Yeah.
Who's flipping hamburgers. They don't have to hire anybody.
That's true.
Never calls in sick, never, gets injured. Nothing.
I wonder if the mechanics who maintain Flippy earn a good salary or not.
I would imagine they'd earn a significantly better salary than a burger flipper.
Yeah. And then now, and more and more of the ordering kiosks are becoming popular in fast food joints. Like I used to see it in, I think, Jack in the Box.
Yeah.
And see 2 to 4 kiosks in several McDonald's now.
Yeah, I've seen stories about robots as servers, waiters. Wow. That's around mostly in Japan.
I would think so, yeah.
They're always ahead of the curve on that stuff.
Yeah.
I've seen stories about delivery drones driving around for Domino's.
Delivery drones, as in like the helicopter flying ones?
No, as in there's driverless. They're not really a car. They're not that big. They're about half the size of a vehicle.
Is that right?
Yeah.
And they're using them for food delivery?
Yeah. They're like a little bit smaller than a golf cart.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's a trip.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool, actually. Let's see. Lord Vader says, let's be honest, the majority of Bernie supporters were college kids.
No doubt. No doubt.
Biden, he appeals to the older voters.
Yeah.
He'll also appeal to those voters with Alzheimer's.
Yeah. Yeah. I think he appeals to more middle-aged voters too, and he also appeals to Democrats who have nostalgia for the Obama years.
Yeah. Welcome, Max Works. Good to have you. Hoi hoi, everybody. Kino Subway says, my grocery store has a robot that goes around looking for spills and stuff now. There's more and more self-checkouts now, too. Yeah.
Yeah, the fight for 15 really pushed more and more of that stuff to become more commonplace.
Yeah. Self-checkout lanes are increasing in more of our Kroger stores in the Midwest. And they're also increasing at places like Walmart.
Yeah. Yeah.
And and Lowe's.
Yeah.
Home improvement places have self-checkout lanes. It's kind of bizarre feeling. Welcome, Smiling Bandito. They have robots replacing warehouse workers now too.
Yeah. I think Amazon employs some of those, or deploys, I should say.
Yeah, I wouldn't doubt it. Oh my gosh. Amazon is so huge that they've got warehouses out the yin yang. And I would easily believe they would employ robotics. Lord Vader asks, Itchy, do you think Obama is a smart politician?
Well, sure. I mean, he got all the way to the presidency. You can't really get that far if you're not very bright.
You mentioned earlier how you predict a possible grooming of AOC to be a future candidate for the DNC.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on all those stories from that are out there where there's been all this talk about how Obama was actually groomed from when he was young to ultimately reach the rank of POTUS?
Yeah, Obama was able to pull it off. He had the ability to put on a pretty good performance, and still does to this day without making statements that are too revealing as to his true motivations. I'm not sure that AOC has that quality.
Yeah, she seems to talk without thinking.
Yeah, yeah. But that won't stop them from trying to push her anyways.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, do you think there's any real like cattiness um, or between her and Pelosi? Because sometimes in the news it seems like they're trying to pit one against the other. Or do you think they're like the bestest friends?
No, not at all. Anyone who seeks power wants it all for themselves. So they're obviously going to have a certain amount of natural, what's the word I'm looking for? Natural abrasiveness or opposition to anyone else who's also seeking power. There's going to be a certain amount of natural clashing between the two.
Let's see. Matt Anui asks, wouldn't the robots just cause everybody to go broke? As if no one's working, nobody will have any money.
Well, that's another one of the unintended consequences, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I wonder if it would just drive people to other industries they normally wouldn't have ever considered going into.
Sure, there would be a certain amount of push for that, but there's also always going to be a need for low to no skilled labor because there's always going to be low to no skilled people.
Yep.
That's just a fact of reality. So once robotics eliminates all of these no to low skilled jobs, what are the no to low skill people going to do? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking there might be a rise in employment in like landscaping, uh, and possibly working in like farms and stuff. I mean, there's always talk about, or at least whenever you think politics, about how only Mexicans are willing to work in the fields and work on farms. But I think a certain population of any race would possibly be driven to, the possibility of working on a farm and, those kinds of service jobs.
Yeah. But even there, at some point, robotics may replace all of that too.
Yeah, I mean, their machines are frequently being used to harvest. So, and if I'm not mistaken, also plant seed. So
Yeah.
it's a matter of developing the technology that will efficiently pick the product as it's ripe.
I don't think it's that far off. I mean, if we can program a driverless car, if Google can have a driverless car, how far is the jump from that to a driverless harvester?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, true. Um, do you guys think if Obama was allowed to run again in 2016, he would beat Trump in 2016?
Oh, that's hard to say. I think it would be a dead heat. I think it would be a toss up.
I think it would be viewed as a close race, but
Yeah.
I still suspect that Trump would still win because they've already had 8 years of Obama, and they saw what it resulted in, and there wasn't much progress made as a whole.
Yeah.
And it just divided the nation racially.
Yeah, it did.
So part of Trump's success is that he's like, despite the fact that he ended up becoming a millionaire, became rich off of real estate and whatnot, and owns all these golf courses. He still kind of is equated as being like the everyman, and he was not. He's never been a politician, and you've got these people like. There's a bunch of tweets that effectively point out that Biden's been in public office for like 40 years at least.
Yeah.
And in all those years, he hasn't implemented any of the things to improve the country. And so there was I guess a murmuring kind of this like this sentiment that politicians are useless. They're all about talk. They never walk the talk. So I think Trump still would have won at 2016, even if he were versus Obama.
Yeah, it's a perfectly reasonable assessment.
Kev Pot says, "What do you think about universal basic income? Personally, I think it will turn everywhere into Venezuela."
Yeah, well, where does the universal basic income come from?
Yeah, that's a very good question.
I mean,
yeah.
The advocate for it would immediately say it comes from government, but where does government get it?
Taxes.
It taxes you. It taxes what? It taxes your universal basic income. So it's this constant circle until you end up having nothing, which is, as Kev Potts said, turns places into Venezuela.
It's a circle jerk.
Yeah, it sure is.
It's like you were talking about previously how the Democrats seek out the younger voters because they're still naive.
Yeah,
and they attract them by making these exorbitant promises. It's like, we're going to get rid of your college debt, your college loans. We're gonna make things so easy for you. Get rid of your debt, and everything will be roses and rainbows. And you can't help but wonder, where's all the money coming from to excuse all this debt?
Yeah. Well, there's another strategy that they've been applying since the 1960s. It's called the Cloward-Piven strategy. It was devised by two college professors, surprise, surprise, in the 1960s. And essentially what that says is a strategy whereby you overload the social services and entitlement and welfare systems to the point where it ends up bankrupting the nation. And once it's bankrupted, then all of these little local offices and activist organizations and entitlement offices kind of rise up to fill the void of the government that just collapsed. So that's where would the money come from in terms of paying all of the student loans? The people pushing this don't care where the money comes from. They're not worried about that at all.
As long as they're not the ones paying it.
Yeah.
Do you think there's anything going on between Trump and Putin? I'm on the fence.
I'm highly skeptical of that.
Yeah.
I mean, Putin is ex-KGB. He's a Soviet guy. So who would he be more likely to collude with? The caricature of the American capitalist, or someone who advocates socialism moving into communism? It doesn't make any sense. And ultimately, there were other things found, other connections found with Hillary's campaign in the Ukraine. There were a lot of scandals discovered there.
Yeah.
Which makes far more sense to me, since she's an Alinskyite. She wrote her senior thesis on how to successfully apply Alinsky's tactics. She is a socialist.
Mm-hmm.
There's no question about it. There's an old adage that, in fact, I believe it's an Alinskyite tactic, is that you accuse your enemy of the very thing that you yourself are doing. And I think that there's a lot of that going on.
Yeah. And there's also been some investigations into Biden's involvement as well as his son's. His son got all these primo contracts with foreign countries for his company. Let's see here.
But I could be wrong. Maybe there will be some new revelation come out someday. Who knows?
Yeah. Welfare state. Yeah.
Yeah.
Lord Vader says AOC is the younger guard of the Democrats, and Pelosi represents the Biden wing of the Democratic Party, or the old guard.
Yeah, no question about that. Many in the younger guard seem to be disillusioned with Pelosi, it seems. So yeah, definitely. And that goes back to the 2008 election. Many of the younger people were disillusioned with Hillary, and so Obama was able to sweep in and take the election away from her. that was pretty funny to watch.
Yeah. Oh man, I thought it was also funny when Hillary was going against Trump, and towards the very end, before she was it seceded, or ultimately, gave in and accepted the fact that she lost. At their big old event, she thought she was a shoo-in. They were going to have this big old celebratory party.
Yeah.
And at the event, when it was time for her to come out, she never did. She stayed behind the curtain, and they had a representative come out and talk on her behalf.
Yeah.
Oh, we're gonna come. We're gonna talk some more tomorrow.
Yeah.
That was so funny. Smiling Bandito says, we're all going to have neural links now, so everyone will be equally skilled thanks to Musk. Oof.
Yeah.
Gosh. Not into that idea.
It sounds scary, but there's a part of me that, if I could just slap a cartridge in my brain and learn a foreign language, or learn taekwondo, or astrophysics, or something like that. There's an appealing part to it too. It seems like a two-edged sword.
Yeah.
Double-edged sword.
It's like Johnny Mnemonic or The Matrix.
Yeah.
I know Kung Fu.
Yeah.
Let's see here. Lord Vader says, so are you guys saying it would have been 50-50?
What would have been 50-50?
Are you still referring back to the Obama versus Trump 2016 theoretical? Or are you talking about something else? I'm not sure. Sometimes I get behind on my chats. Kevpot asks, How has the student debt system not collapsed yet? All these women with gender studies, all these women with gender studies degrees can never pay it back.
It's a good question, but everything takes time. It'll probably collapse. My guess is right about the time all of those gender studies graduates reach middle age, late middle age, is probably about the time it'll collapse.
What kind of industry is there where you can make use of a gender studies degree?
Well, what's happening is corporate America, in just about every industry, is hiring these people and putting them in human resources and in marketing to wokeify their marketing or wokeify their hiring practices.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But there's obviously not nearly enough of those positions to go around to, for every degree that they're issuing. So that's part of the problem. And at some point, and it's already beginning, corporate America is going to identify the worthlessness of it and stop hiring them. It's already begun. There was the website unwoke.hr.
Oh yeah, I heard about that.
Opened up. That was kind of the opening shot of that. There have been a number of other articles. I think Clownfish TV did shows on a couple of those articles talking about how corporations are really starting to look at not hiring them and how to get rid of the ones they got. Because they're a detriment to business.
That's a fact. Wolverine, welcome. Wolverine is chuckling. My quote unquote welfare state comment comes up like 2 to 4 topics later. I'm so sorry. I have a tendency to take forever because I'm trying to I try and follow a certain conversation.
Sure.
And it's like then sometimes there's follow-up questions.
Yeah. Well, conversations ebb and flow,
Yeah. Lord Vader says, so Itchy, what do you think of Obama when he first became president?
Well, initially, during the campaign, I was cautiously skeptical. I was skeptical mainly because of his campaign, the nature of his campaign, the way they were depicted, the way the media and his campaign marketing were depicting him as this kind of second coming figure, this messianic figure. These music videos, one of the music videos I remember was American Prayer, with all these celebrities praying for Obama. And so all of that was disturbing to me. Outside of that, I tried to keep an open mind. I thought, well, maybe, this guy's going to be another JFK. But then after he was elected, we started to find out more about the guy and his history. And then we saw his wacko policies. And my opinion immediately fell through the floor after that started to happen.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mananui says, and then we'll all get lobotomized because some jackass hacked them. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's another concern.
Yeah, 4chan, I'll get in there.
Oh, shoot. Oh, dang. Welcome, Fat Steven Seagal beat up Alex Kurtzman. Hail.
Hail.
Everyone's welcoming Fat Steven Seagal. Kempot says, gender studies degrees get you into cosmopolitan charities and those awful lobbyist groups that sponge off the taxpayer.
Yeah, it may be fun for parties, but what's that going to do for you after the party's over?
get you into the next party.
And it may get you to write for some of these publications like Cosmopolitan, as some of these garbage tier writers, but they don't make squat.
So is it like the people who write those articles, how to satisfy your lover in the bedroom every time?
Yeah, those kinds of things. We're more familiar with like Screen Rant or Polygon or that kind of stuff. Esquire, the people who write for entertainment, we're more familiar with those writers.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't make jack shit.
Excuse me. Yeah, Wolverine. It happens. I just found it silly and amusing. Yeah. I fall behind now and then. Matt Inouye says we can't keep hackers out of the computers we have. No, but let's put them in our fucking brains.
yeah. That it's definitely a concern.
Yeah, if anyone wants it bad enough, cracker or hacker will do what it takes and find a way.
Yeah,
because every form of technology humans create, humans can hack.
Yep.
It's just nature of the beast.
Yep.
Because it's all originating from the human brain.
Yeah.
On a totally crazy segue on that thought, do you think that when Microsoft became a huge player in the operating system environment in industry, do you think it was they who came up with the idea, let's infect this operating system and applications with viruses? That way we can create new companies to fight those viruses that we created on the machine, and have another line of business and income.
I know that's an old suspicion that many people have. Whether or not that's actually happened, I have no way of knowing. It's not something I've ever really heavily researched or been a part of internally.
As far as I'm concerned, the Microsoft Windows operating system itself is a virus. But that's another story.
It might be.
Back in Lord Vader says, back in 2008, people acted like he was the Democrats' version of Ronald Reagan.
Yeah, there were some who tried to depict him that way, but it was much worse. I mean, oh my God! I mean, there were teachers having their students sing songs about him in class, posting it on YouTube. It was what is the right word? Not hysteria. It was like a cult mentality.
Mm-hmm.
It was bizarre. I had never seen anything like that before or since.
Yeah, it was very, very creepy and
it was
ominous. And it was like, and then you watch the mainstream media, and they were like falling over themselves.
Oh yeah.
And no matter what, they always put a positive spin on every little thing he did.
Yeah. And, I can remember Saturday Night Live putting out some kind of statement to the effect that they can't make fun of him. There's nothing to make fun of.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, it was just sheer lunacy. It really was like a cult. It really was like a cult.
Yeah, and Saturday Night Live many, many years ago used to be funny. But
I haven't watched it in decades.
Me either. That's why I say many, many, many years ago.
Yeah.
The funniest thing about them is themselves. They're a joke. Let's see here. Giving Obama a Nobel Peace Prize on the hope he would do something good was a joke.
Well, the Nobel Peace Prize. Yeah, they gave him that prize before he ever actually did anything. I remember that. But there was a lot of people giving him awards and all kinds of stuff before he ever did a damn thing. But the Nobel Peace Prize is worthless anyways. It's just a way for far leftists to kind of stroke each other. It doesn't have any real meaning anymore.
Didn't they also give one of those to Greta
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
All it is it's just, they hand it out to anybody who agrees with them politically and makes a big wave in popular culture. And that's really the extent of it.
It's very much like a visual representation of the participation trophy.
Yeah.
And Obama, during his 8 years of his presidency, he got us into numerous wars, at least 8 of them, I think, if I remember correctly. So,
yeah, there was a number of things going on, and then there was the whole Fast and Furious scandal.
Benghazi was an issue.
Yeah, that sure was.
Let's see here. Wolverine says, hackers nothing. Never ascribe to malice when you can expect from incompetence, Matanui. Foobarred, patches, bugs, glitches, and accidents and maintenance and upkeep would be the real issue.
Yeah.
Lord Vader is asking, Itchy, do you have any sources in Lucasfilm?
I can neither confirm nor deny.
Come on, admit you're best friends with George Lucas himself. That would be kind of scary if you were actually best friends with Kathleen Kennedy.
I don't think I could sit in the same room with that woman.
Lord Vader asks, so how much damage did Obama even do to this country?
Significantly, mostly during the first half of his first term. Primarily with the passage of the Obamacare Act. Primarily because during that first 2 years, he had carte blanche. There were no checks and balances to stop him on anything he wanted to do. So he did significant damage during that period.
And interestingly enough, one of the, if he encountered any resistance from the wussy-ass GOP, he just did an executive order.
Yeah.
So he was noted as being one of the presidents who's used executive order more than I think anybody in history.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Wolverine says, never seen anything like it before or since. Those were the same cult we're fighting now. Today they have psychos with toy guns pretending to shoot Trump in front of grade schoolers in class.
Oh, yeah. Well, those are the same psychos that were in the Obama cult. I mean, I remember them selling Obama dildos.
What?
Oh, yeah.
Is it supposed to be based on an actual mold?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah. There were Obama votive candles.
Oh, what the hell?
There were people painting him like Jesus, depicting him as Jesus.
I think I remember those. All right.
I mean, there was all kinds of stuff like that.
Votive candles and dildos? Ay.
Yeah.
Egads.
I know.
Egads. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. There was an event in California, of course.
Oh yeah, of course.
Called Orgasms for Obama. I shit you not. And it was a bunch of these I don't know what you would call them, swingers or whatever they were, in a large gathering being led by this supposed orgasm guru to simultaneously release orgasms and direct that energy towards the Obama campaign so he would win. I mean, it was just bizarre, all this stuff.
Oh man.
Yeah, it was really weird.
Oh gosh, you can't even make that kind of stuff.
I know.
Oh damn. That's like kind of around the same level of stupidity as Gwyneth Paltrow releasing a candle called "This Smells Like My Vagina."
Yeah, she does a lot of weird stuff with her vagina. Every so often, there's a story like every year there's a story about Gwyneth Paltrow and her vagina. Either she's steaming it, or putting flowers in it, or taking pictures of it, or whatever it is.
Oh dang! I think the latest I heard was there's a sequel now. That there's a candle called "This Smells Like My Orgasm."
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh jeez, craziness.
Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, along the same lines of the psychos with the toy guns pretending to shoot Trump in front of grade schoolers. There, you see all this footage from all these events or like protester-like events with floats, and they are depicting decapitation of Trump and Kathy Griffith, that stupid comedian, has been. She posted a picture where it made it look like she was holding his severed head.
Oh.
And you had all that kind of garbage out there in the mainstream media, and then everyone gripes if you say the slightest thing about Obama.
Oh yeah.
And there was a big old uproar or stink about that meme where there was what kind of looked like a family portrait, but it was of monkeys, and Obama's face was swapped out for one of the monkeys, for the baby monkey, and the Obama fans were all up at arms, and oh jeez.
Yeah.
Talk about overreaction. Excuse me.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. Lord Vader asks, how do you guys feel about Edward Snowden?
I have not followed that story. So I don't have much of an opinion on him one way or the other.
Based on what I have followed and read about Edward Snowden, I think as far as I can tell, he's innocent and he did the right thing, and did, as I recall, he basically pointed out legit concerns about, the government underground, behind the scenes stuff that shouldn't be happening. So he shouldn't be charged or penalized with a crime.
Yeah.
Let's see here. Hey, J Money. Justin, welcome. Oh my. Every time I see someone say "oh my," I imagine George Takei.
Yeah, me too.
So I try to read it in that form, in that style. Oh my. Smiling Bandito, great combo. Gotta head out. Thanks for letting me hang out. a bit. Cheers, everyone. Take it easy, Smiling Bandito. Excuse me. Wolverine says they were there quietly, not ready to fully show themselves in the 70s when some of us were in school.
Yeah. I can remember a little bit of it happening early on because I was taught by the hippies from the 60s when they reached middle-aged and I was in school. So I remember a little bit of it, but it wasn't anything like it is now. Not even remotely.
It seems like the more and more I hear and read about it, it's becoming more and more blatant. It's like right there in your face.
Yeah, I think Gen X was immune to a lot of it because they had video games and they had great movies and TV shows and they had all arcades and they had all this cool stuff to do and go to. And that's really what they were interested in. They weren't interested in the activist hysterics of their parents. Mm-hmm. That's why they got labeled slackers, because they weren't doing any of that crap. They were interested in other things. So.
Yeah. It. Oh my gosh. Yeah. All right. What did I miss here? That Wolverine says that was the second part of the comment before it. Wise. The second part of the comment before it. Oh. All right. So it was part of this one. Never seen anything like it before or since. Those were the same cult we're fighting now. Today, they have psychos with toy guns pretending to shoot Trump in front of grade schoolers in class. They were there quietly, not ready to fully show themselves in the 70s when some of us were in school. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't like it is now. That was when they were still in the get control of influential positions phase. Yeah. The one starting with I've talked to. Oh. Did I have that wrong too? I've talked to. Oh man, I'm so behind. I've lost track.
Oh, I thought you hit them all.
I thought I did too. Now I'm trying to find where the I've talked to message was. Okay. Wolverine's laughing at me. I don't know if I classify as being a boomer, but oh my gosh. Yeah, I mean, Gen X was, there was the entertainment boom, the tech boom. There were so many cool things happening.
Yeah, there really was.
I even think the music was better than it is today. It seems like since the 90s or 2000s, everything started going downhill.
Yeah, well, there was a lot of experimentation, so there was a lot of different genres of music. You had metal, you had rap, you had classic rock and roll, you had pop, you had country music, you had, and all these other subgenres that fell into all that other stuff. You had stuff like goth music. You had stuff like The Cure, which really didn't fit into anything. It was just a lot of experimentation, which produced a lot of really unique acts and sounds, which is just gone. Now the big acts are nothing but, Britney Spears clones.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much it.
Yeah, I guess the top, well, I don't know. Some will argue that she has talent, but Taylor Swift is the the big one in the news, and a lot of other artists seem to be clones of her.
Yeah, and look, some of them do have talent. I don't deny that. My main point is that that's all there is now.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yeah, yeah. Kev Pot says no one will have nostalgia for the last 20 years.
Yeah, that's something I've said often, that people are going to look at the last 20 years as kind of a cannibalistic period of pop culture. I mean, most of the art from these creators just suck. Star Wars is a prime example of that, where they're not creating anything new. Even in the very early days of Star Wars, when George Lucas just went from A New Hope to The Empire Strikes Back, look at all the new stuff in Empire Strikes Back. I mean, we got snow speeders, we got AT-ATs, we got a superstar destroyer, we got Bespin, Cloud City, and the cloud cars that they rode around on there. We got Tauntauns. We got being frozen in carbonite, which we had never seen before. We had Ugnaughts. We had all this new stuff. And then you come to the Disney trilogy, and there's nothing new. Nothing.
Hey, wait a minute. Wait, was that the introduction? Oh, no. It wasn't until Rise of Skywalker that they introduced the red stormtroopers, right?
Yeah, but even that, I mean, is that really something new, or is that just taking a stormtrooper and painting it red?
Just taking a stormtrooper and painting it red. It's the lipstick stormtrooper.
It's just really, visually, the whole Disney trilogy is just boring.
And it seems like the only changes they made were they took the Millennium Falcon, replaced the round radar disc with the rectangular one. And then I think they put a stripe on the TIE fighter.
Yeah, they did that. They painted the X-Wing a different color. I mean, it was just all the same crap.
Yeah, it's like the First Order didn't have any imagination whatsoever. They just, we got all these leftover parts. Let's just reuse them.
Yeah, it was just really, really, really boring stuff. But that's these creators are coming in. They're not creating anything new. They're just barnacling themselves to pre-existing material. And that's what the last 20 years has essentially been. I mean, they're not coming out with a new Ghostbusters movie with a new story. Well, they are now. But in 2016, they weren't doing that. They were just doing a remake and attaching themselves to the franchise and trying to make the same movie with women. I mean, it's the same crap over and over again,
Yeah.
That's why you get so many reboots. They can't advance the story forward into new territory the way George Lucas did with The Empire Strikes Back and then Return of the Jedi. They have to remake the original. And they just, barnacle because they can't think of new things. They can't create. They're incapable of creating. They can only attach themselves to pre-existing things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you think J.J. Abrams was the right person to kick off the sequel trilogy? Do you think he might have had a vision of where they could take the property once Disney acquired Lucasfilm?
Well, if you had asked me that question in 2014, I would have said yes, absolutely. But after seeing The Force Awakens, my answer was absolutely not.
Right.
Because, it was so much of the Disney trilogy is clearly just fan fiction.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of quality, it's so clearly fan fiction.
Yeah.
And because of that, it's really substandard.
Oh, very much so.
Yeah.
Yeah. when I first saw The Force Awakens, I immediately started drawing parallels or comparisons with A New Hope because
With what?
A New Hope,
Oh yeah.
because it seems like it was literally beat for beat a recreation, a remake, a reboot, and it was like, and I started to notice, number one, there was no character development. And number two, they were posing some interesting ideas, like Finn, the stormtrooper, breaking the programming, if you will,
Yeah.
and the like. Um, but then one of the other major things I thought was a mistake is you didn't take the opportunity while you had the chance to reunite the original cast.
Yeah, it's probably the biggest cinematic sin in history,
I agree with that.
And yeah, obviously, if you want to progress the story forward, the movie can't focus on them the way it did in the original trilogy, but it didn't have to. I mean, you could have had a 5-minute sequence, just something.
Mm-hmm.
It was such an oversight.
I know it. When the news came out that Disney acquired Lucasfilm, I was like, "Oh, that's interesting." Lucas is actually done with Star Wars, and he doesn't want to continue um, in that part of the career or industry. And then I was thinking, well, there had been like interviews and stories that came out saying that uh, George was kind of in the line of thinking of these days, oh, I only intended for 6 movies total. Whereas in early interviews, I'm pretty certain he planned out 9 total.
Yeah.
He decided to tell the story of the first 3 in movie form.
Sure. Well, George, I had been following George pretty closely over the decades, or at least as closely as a fan can, through interviews in Starlog and on PM Magazine and Entertainment Tonight and wherever I could find it.
Yeah.
But he kind of oscillated between saying 9 movies and 12 movies. And at one point he said there's only 6 movies, there won't be any more. And I think George always struck me as an experimental kind of guy. So it's not like other people, when they plan something out, that's the way it is and that's the way it's going to be. With George, those plans change depending on his budget, the technology available to him, his own motivation, ideas that occur to him at any given time. So that those things change. It's sad because we've really lost that. We've lost that experimental vibrancy that everything under his era had, even when it wasn't successful or wasn't entirely successful. It still had this vibrancy of experimental excitement to it.
Yeah, that was really energizing.
Yeah,
Vibrancy,
that's where true artistry is, in my opinion. And it's gone from Star Wars forever. At least for as long as Kathleen Kennedy is in charge. That's for sure.
Yeah, it's like you lose that artistic expression when you refuse to draw outside the lines. You lose that added creativity. I was thinking that, as soon as, Disney acquired Lucasfilm, that if Lucas sold to Disney, then there must have been a hell of a good reason for it. And that also, if anyone were to take over the reins and release a sequel trilogy, then at the time, Disney would be the ones to do it right and to do it justice. Of course, we would find out later that that was totally wrong. Um, let's see here. All right, so Meta was talking about improving comments. Wolverine says the rank and file lefties probably will at KevPot. I know a few who honestly believe down to the pit of their soul that everything the far left screams is the pure truth and the soul of goodness. Yeah. One of the things that concerned me is, at one of my jobs, I encountered a person who who told me that he planned on voting for any Democrat, no matter what, anyone but Trump.
I'm sorry. Could you say that again?
Oh, I was working. I was at work one time, and we briefly somehow, I don't know, I don't remember how, but we somehow touched on politics briefly.
Yeah.
And it was an older gentleman, and he made this statement, which I thought was like kind of mind blowing and concerning, where he said that he had no plans to vote for Trump. He wanted to vote for a Democrat, any Democrat, to not vote for, so he didn't have to vote for Trump. And it was kind of like, if you feel that strongly, why don't you vote Libertarian or Green Party or, someone outside of the big two? I mean, that's kind of the reason we have those other parties. So
yeah.
Other choices. Yeah, that was kind of a crazy thought.
Well, I'm definitely libertarian leaning these days. I like the thought of parties outside of the big two. Obviously, there's also strategic considerations to take into account. Obviously, if you vote for Libertarian rather than Republican, then you're taking away a vote from Republicans that could cause them to lose against a Democrat.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a consideration.
Sure is.
On the other hand, we also want to be able to vote your conscience. Certainly, you should be able to. But unfortunately, the two big parties use strategies to keep all of the other parties suppressed.
Yeah.
They keep them out of debates, et cetera, et cetera. So there has to be major reform for third parties to be viable, I think. And the two big parties have to be kept under control to prevent them from oppressing third parties.
On a kind of somewhat similar note, I saw an article, or actually a Twitter thread, saying that when they had the Democratic National Convention, they didn't even invite or ask Tulsi Gabbard to be involved at all, which I found kind of interesting, because I thought, and you are probably significantly stronger in history than I am, but when it comes to the national conventions for a political party, isn't it kind of maybe an unsaid or undocumented given that anyone who competed and participated in the debates for presidential nominee would be invited by default to the Democratic National Convention?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
No, understandably so, because I probably worded it horribly. So sometimes for better or for worse, I tend to be very verbose. Tulsi Gabbard, as you know, or was one of the Democrat national candidates for POTUS, and she was involved in the debates early on. But when it came to the Democrat National Convention, she, from her own words in her Twitter, she was never approached or invited to the event to speak. And I was under the impression that if you went so far as to become one of the candidates that participated in the debates and stuff, that like by default you'd be given a chance to speak at the national convention. Do you happen to know anything one way or the other as to whether there's like maybe even an unsaid rule saying that you're automatically invited? Or
that's something I really haven't really paid much attention to.
Alrighty, good deal. Let's see here. Talking about YouTube flagging comments. Kev Pot is asking, why did Force Ghost Anakin Skywalker not appear to Galen and tell him to knock it off?
Who's Galen?
I could be wrong, but I think it's a reference to Kylo Ren.
That's anyone's guess. Probably because everything was under Kathleen Kennedy, so she must not have wanted it. Because there were actually pre-production artwork depicting Anakin Skywalker as a Force ghost for the Disney trilogy in some of the early concept art. This depicting him as kind of a haunted individual that was struggling between his Anakin self and his mechanical self, and he was the spirit that was kind of half cyborgish. It was really cool looking artwork too. But they didn't go with it.
I presume it was based on the Hayden Christensen version of Anakin?
Yes. Yeah. And in fact, I believe I put it in my documentary on that I have on my YouTube channel about George Lucas's vision for the sequel trilogy, what his sequel trilogy would have looked like. I have a lot of that pre-production artwork in that documentary.
Speaking of which, was there... was it finalized or concluded that was George Lucas's scripts for the sequel trilogy ever released publicly or leaked out?
Not that I'm aware of. But I have to articulate here, he never wrote a complete screenplay. What he did write were treatments that he handed to Kathleen Kennedy and J.J. Abrams, and he expected to work with them to flesh those treatments out into full screenplays. Mm-hmm. But they chose to toss the treatments out and go their own route entirely. And everyone was worse off for it.
Yeah. That's a fact. Excuse me. Wolverine says the Democratic Party shut Tulsi out hard and fast. They didn't seem to want any part of her. Yeah. Yeah, seriously. That's pretty bad.
I've got something I have to get to, so I probably have to wrap this up pretty soon if you're okay with that.
Absolutely. We'll conclude with Matanui's comment. He's hurling an insult at Kylo Ren. Yeah.
Yeah.
And, that was a good one too. Galo Ren. Kind of like Raylo. It's like a combination of Raylo and Kylo Ren. Ren. Can you do us a favor, please? And you got the floor. Share with the world how you can be found on social media.
Sure. So you can find me on Twitter. At ItchyBacca is my handle on Twitter. You can find me at Disney Star Wars is dumb.wordpress.com. You can find my blog there, or you can find me on YouTube at ItchyBacca is the name. My name of my channel is ItchyBacca.
Right on.
You can email me at ItchyBacca@protonmail.com.
Oh, nice. Nice. You can find me on Twitter at WyzGyz Tweets, on Twitch at WyzGyz Twitches, on YouTube under WyzGyz Entertainment. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Mark the bell for notifications. Indicate that you want to receive all notifications, not just none. And hopefully you'll receive word when I release a new video, upload a new video, or do a stream. And please share your thoughts in the chat below, in the comments below. Thank you, everyone in chat, for joining us today. Thanks to everyone who watches us on replay. And thanks to our very, very special guest, ItchyBacca. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so very much.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I've really enjoyed my time here.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. We are going to end the broadcast in 3, 2,